Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MU Extension Weekly Forage and Livestock Town Hall meeting. My name is Eric Bailey. I'm a state beef nutrition specialist.
I'll try to listen to this.
And I'm glad y'all are here with us. So today my co-host will be Matt Herring. He has changed his name to Ask Questions Here. If you would like to provide questions to our speakers today through the chat, feel free to basically direct message those questions to Ask Questions Here, and Matt will forward them on to the hosts. So just a couple of quick reminders. We're also simulcasting these town halls to YouTube, and if you're unable to watch them live or you want to go back and rewatch a part, we actually post these videos in their entirety to YouTube afterwards. So if there's anybody else that might be interested in the content that we present today, but are unable to join us, please share that with them and let them know that there's a way to see it asynchronously. So I'll go ahead and get us started. As always, we will have Pat Guinan with our weather report. Pat, are you on?
I am. Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into it. Well, not a lot of relief since we met last week. There were a few storms that managed to move out of Iowa into northwest Missouri, but they really didn't drop much rain. The heaviest report I saw was out of Harrison County, and it was about 4,500. So we need rain, and we need it now. These are radar estimates for the month of June across much of the north central U.S., and I highlighted Missouri here. Any of those areas that you see in blue, shades of blue, or even those wider shades, that's very little rainfall has fallen during the first 17 days of the month. And so, anytime this time of year in the growing season, when you go this long without any rainfall, things get pretty dry pretty quickly. And so you can see some of the totals in this table below. We've only had a trace of rain here. So we're well below average for the month of June. I will note that on the right, look at the drought status. This is a map that just came out this morning. Just a bad situation for our neighbors to the north. Look at the northern plains, look at Iowa, much of the northern corn belt. It's not good. We see moderate to severe drought. There was a big expansion of a severe drought across Iowa compared to last week. So conditions continue to deteriorate, and it's just not a good time of year to be in a drought. And unfortunately, that's the case. You can see it's started to grow in parts of northern Missouri. We have moderate drought over parts of Worth, northern Harrison County, pockets in east central. So things are starting to impact Missouri with these dry conditions. Well, we're not out of the woods yet. These high temperatures, unusually high temperatures, this would be well above normal for the month of July, which is typically our hottest month. Look at these numbers on the top here. These are maximum temperatures forecast over the next 5 days. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, just some really high numbers, record heat for that matter. Look at triple-digit heat today across northwest Missouri, southeast Nebraska, northeast Kansas, and southwest Iowa. That's unusual, especially in the middle part of June. And looking for tomorrow, that heat is going to expand a little bit further eastward. We could hit triple-digit heat right here in mid-Missouri and east central sections. Drought and heat go hand in hand. And so we're seeing the soils are drying out. We're seeing transpirations go down because vegetation is starting to stress. So you create a desert-like environment, and that allows those maximum temperatures to literally go out of control like a desert environment. And so that's why we're seeing these unusually high temperatures so early in the year. On Saturday, not much better, maybe a little bit cooler, perhaps with some clouds and a little bit of isolated scattered showers and thunderstorms, but still highs in the mid-90s. And then on Sunday as well. And I'm looking at right here is on the far right, we have a strong cold front that is anticipated to move through our state late on Sunday and into Monday, and much better, more seasonable conditions with highs on Monday in the upper 70s to low 80s across much of the state. So that will be welcome relief. On the lower left, because of these hot conditions, we are seeing a little bit more humidity, higher dew points over the past 24 hours. We're already in the upper 60s, even some low 70 dew points here in Missouri, that's very uncomfortable. And look at much of Iowa, parts of eastern Nebraska, northeastern Kansas, northwest Missouri, with those high dew points and triple digit heat. That's going to put heat indices near 100 and 105 degrees. And that's why you see the heat advisory in effect through this evening. Again, I mentioned a pattern change, a badly needed pattern change is what is needed. It looks like that is going to happen come late in the day on Sunday and on into early next week. So let's hopefully we can just hang in there and get through these next few days, because it does look like cooler weather is in the offing for next week. This is the forecast of precip, another very important variable. We need the rain, and it does look like there are going to be some chances of showers and thunderstorms. I think our best chances will come across northern Missouri over the next few days, especially starting tomorrow night and into Saturday. There is a forecast of a cold front to stall out across southern Iowa, northern Missouri, which could bring us our best chances of rainfall across that part of the state come Friday night and Saturday morning. Some of these storms could make it down into central and southern Missouri, but it does look like the highest likelihood for heaviest precip is across this area, southern Iowa, northern Missouri, where again, we really need the rainfall. Hopefully by next week with that front moving through, that stronger front moving through on Sunday night into Monday, that will bring us another pretty good chance of showers and thunderstorms across the area. I do want to mention this because I'm actually a little bit surprised conditions aren't worse as I thought they would be by now in regard to drought stress. But I think it's due to the antecedent conditions. We've only had 2 months since October with below average precipitation. And so the soil moisture reserve was actually in pretty good shape at the beginning of this spring. And April and May, we had above average precip pretty much statewide and below average temperatures. And so we had many cloudy days in May. And so evaporation rates were below average. And so the soils the soils have retained that moisture a little bit longer and given us a little bit more time in regard to not seeing these big impacts that, in the next 6 to 10 days, if we don't get any rain, things are going to look a lot different than they do now. And that's not a good thing. That being said, there's only so much that can be stored in the soil profile. And so these evapotranspiration rates, they've been very efficient the past week. We've been running about a 1/4 inch a day. And so this surplus soil moisture is disappearing rapidly. What we'll see is dryland and upland areas, they will start showing the stress first. And again, it's very critical we receive significant rainfall very soon. And when I say significant, I'm talking about 1 to 2 inches of rain over a large area, because if we do get that, that will put us in a holding pattern for another week or so. And if we don't get the rain soon, again, things are going to look a lot different in about 10 days to 14 days. So that's a big deal right now. I'm showing this right now, this map that if you do, you can report any type of impact or drought conditions in your area by going to this website on the bottom. They're called Condition Monitoring Observations. It provides information. It documents what's going on in your area. I've always said, who knows a drought better than a person who's experiencing those impacts and drought conditions? When you submit a report, that is seen by state and national officials in regard to assessing conditions and what's going on in your state. So please consider submitting a report if you think you'd like to submit some information. Once you click on that button, you can fill out a survey. It looks like a lot of information here, but you can actually do it pretty quickly. You can submit your report, you geolocate your location, you can upload pictures to show impact reports. This is documented. It goes into the National Drought Mitigation Center, which is a part of the National Integrated Drought Information System. I would highly recommend for those folks who want to submit any sort of condition monitoring report to use this resource. Currently, we have no reports, no condition monitoring reports in the state of Missouri, but hopefully we'll get those rains and cooler conditions definitely look like they're on the way. And I am going to end on a hopeful note. This is the forecast for next week, the 6 to 10 day outlook. So this will put us through much of next week. It's nice to see those blues on the left. That's an enhanced likelihood of below normal temperatures. It looks like all of Missouri is within that blue area. And then on the right, more important is precipitation. It does look like more of an active pattern to set up next week with above normal precipitation, at least according to this forecast. So Eric, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Pat, thanks again as always. We really appreciate the detailed weather reports, especially during a time like right now where we're getting close to drought. So, Matt, are there any questions for Pat?
No questions at this time, Eric.
Okay, thank you, sir. Well, we will go ahead and move on. Today we have Dr. Casey Olson, who is the WM and FA Lewis Distinguished Chair and Professor of Range Beef Cattle Nutrition and Management at Kansas State University. He'll be discussing some research that his group has done over the past several years, related to the biological control of Sericea Lespedeza. I chose this topic even though Dr. Olson's research is in a range type setting, a native warm season forage system, just because the amount of Sericea Lespedeza that I'm seeing in Missouri as I travel across the state doing extension events. Now, the vast majority of it appears to be in the road ditches and on hillsides and places where basically nothing else will grow. But as insidious of a problem as the invasion of Sericea Lespedeza has been to the tallgrass prairie, I think it's important that maybe we open up a broader conversation about the potential for it to cause some problems for us if it isn't already. So with that being said, Dr. Olson, the floor is yours, sir. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. It's good to visit with my old colleagues from Mizzou. I miss you guys. I don't get back to visit very often, but I think about you all the time. So Eric, I need to share my screen. Is that okay with you?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
All right, is my audio okay?
Very good, Casey.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of bragging on the tallgrass prairie region where I work to start with, and then I'm going to talk to you about a 13-year course of research that began back in 2009, and it's really changed the way we think about, or our perceptions about, the value of the place we call home. So bragging begins. Originally, the tallgrass prairie occupied the footprint that you see there on the right, about 165 million acres prior to European settlement, including much of North Missouri. Now, not very much of that remains. And the biggest extant chunk of tallgrass prairie is in eastern Kansas and northeastern Oklahoma, just 4% of what we originally had. And that's a shame, because the tallgrass prairie remnant is home to more than 1,200 different species, including human beings. And that makes it, at least on small spatial scales, more diverse than a rainforest ecosystem. Every human being, whether they realize it or not, benefits from biodiversity. Every human being benefits from carbon sequestration and therefore clean air. And every human being benefits from clean water and the water filtration that is provided by tallgrass prairie sod. Now, if you're an Aggie, you get some additional benefits. Without the benefit of fertilizer, simply using the native nitrogen fixing forbs, this area annually produces about 4,000 pounds of forage dry matter per acre. And for a short season that extends from usually late April to mid-August, it's capable of supporting yearling cattle gains that can approach 3 pounds per day. That's fairly amazing. Annually, this tallgrass prairie remnant is home to about 1.3 million transient stocker cattle that come to us from all of the states except Alaska most years, and about a 500,000 beef cows of permanent residence. And this grassland is the economic engine that supports the rural communities of the Flint Hills, many of which have vibrant local economies. So we only have two Achilles heels here. Okay, in the first place, we're entirely dependent on surface water. Well water, rural water is actually fairly rare. So when it dries out, usually we run out of water before we run out of grass. Okay, the other Achilles heel here is that because we're good at growing stuff that doesn't belong here, if it gets a foothold, likes to grow here as well. Sericea Lespedeza certainly is one of those exotic invaders. So some colleagues at Cornell coined a very interesting ecological term a few years ago. At some level, all invasive species are at least annoying, right? But there's only a handful, which Richardson and co-workers term transformers, that are capable of invading an otherwise healthy, well-managed ecosystem and substantially degrading it over a relatively short period of time. Sericea Lespedeza is a transformer, as you might have guessed. My colleague, Jeff Davidson with Extension here at KSU, I've heard him say Sericea is the plutonium of the plant community. And I don't disagree with that, but I think he means something slightly different. Okay, what we have here in Kansas has been here, at least the germplasm has been here since about 1930. It was originally brought into Kansas to revegetate strip mine soils that were contaminated with heavy metals. But in the 90 years of its residency here, it has changed. Okay, it has expressed a different set of genes that make it very difficult to deal with in this ecosystem. And I call it a wild type of Sericea Lespedeza. And I think a better way to describe it is it's like a feral hog. Okay, the cute little white farm pigs there in the lower left, if they get off of, at least a breeding pair gets off of their farm of origin and into the countryside, okay, within a very few generations, they look like this. Okay, same pigs, same genetics, different set of environmental circumstances, different genes get expressed, right? And that's what's happened with Sericea Lespedeza. Over the last 90 years, its tannin concentration has intensified, its physical stature has grown, and it's become a real problem to deal with. Here's the laundry list of things that make me wring my hands over Sericea Lespedeza. It can grow on almost any soil type, regardless of how degraded it is. It's a deeply rooted plant that has a root structure that's not unlike a clown wig that you see somebody wearing at a ball game or something. It gets very tall, creates a robust canopy that tends to rob photosynthetic resources from neighboring plants. It's highly resistant to grazing, at least by large herbivores, because it's scorchingly high in condensed tannins. And tannins, if you're not familiar with how they act nutritionally, they're capable both in the plant that produces them and in the animal that would be unlucky enough to ingest tannins of sequestering all of the free nitrogen that is available in the rumen. Okay, and when there's no nitrogen available in the rumen, microbial cell protein is not manufactured. The animal slowly starves to death. Not only that, Sericea is a very prolific seed producer. We've measured it. We've measured single stems that produce more than 850 seeds in a year. And one mature crown might have 40 to 50 stems on it. The seed is hard and smooth, and that gives it tremendous durability in the soil seed bank. Seed that has been recovered from the soil seed bank that was thought to be in excess of 7 years old has been successfully germinated. So a seed that was shed years ago, okay, might turn up as a viable young plant. So what we've been using since about 1980 to deal with Sericea Lespedeza is specialty herbicides. It really hasn't addressed the problem in any meaningful way. It's obviously a repeating cost. It's something you're going to have to keep doing year after year after year. And since 1980, the affected acreage in the state has increased more than 60-fold. But the real problem, okay, with herbicide application in a very diverse native ecosystem is that herbicide doesn't care if it lands on a good plant or a bad plant. It's going to kill. And all of the native legumes, all of the native wildflowers that are functional in our ecosystem are also susceptible to those specialty herbicides. And the net result has been a loss in biodiversity. And that is not only at the level of native plants. The invertebrates that feed on some of these plants no longer have a food source. The grassland obligate birds that feed on those invertebrates no longer have a food source. And we are beyond a crisis stage in Kansas. So I got interested in this problem because I'm a landowner, and I was losing carrying capacity for beef cattle to Sericea Lespedeza, and I was trained as an animal nutritionist, not a range ecologist. So I started with really basic questions like, how does the condensed tannin concentration in Sericea Lespedeza fluctuate over time? This is some of Garrett Pree's master's work. And in the column second from the right is condensed tannin concentrations in grams, concentration rather, in grams per kilogram. Just mentally slide the decimal over one location and you get percent. But basically what we learned is the condensed tannin concentration is not static. It builds over time and reaches a maximum at the budding and flowering stages of plant growth. It's basically like the plant is armoring itself immediately before it becomes physiologically vulnerable following seed production so that it isn't grazed. And incidentally, more than half of that condensed tannin has protein binding in the gut. Next question. Since beef cattle are the most economically relevant herbivore in the Flint Hills, how much will an experienced animal, say a beef cow, that's lived here all her life, eat? And so using fecal microhistology, we tested this one summer. What we found is that in June, July, and October, consumption was pretty substantial. However, when condensed tannin was at its maximum, consumption dropped off to less than 5%. And we were later to learn that the threshold for control of Sericea Lespedeza, at least from a reproductive standpoint, is around 5% of an herbivore's diet when stocked at a full stocking rate complement. So the plant read the script, figured out how to protect itself and when to protect itself from damage by herbivory. I think I mentioned before that most of the animal unit months in eastern Kansas are occupied by yearling beef cattle that come from all points of the compass. By my calculations, about 70% of those animal unit months are occupied by inexperienced cattle. And another question that we had to answer is how much Sericea Lespedeza do those yearling cattle select? And over the course of 2 years, again using fecal microhistology, the number was essentially zero. There was only one collection period during our conventional yearling steer grazing season where it was even detectable in the diets of the yearling cattle. So our conclusion here is that our major economically relevant herbivore was not going to be useful to help us bring Sericea Lespedeza to heel. So our next thought, is there something that would be affordable and effective that we could add to ruminant diets that would help them to either become more tannin tolerant or to mitigate some of the consumption of condensed tannins? And in this experiment, okay, we used ruminal inoculum from cattle, sheep, and goats. They were evaluated separately. In some circumstances, those ruminants were fed a high tannin supplement before the rumen fluid was collected. In some cases, they were not. And we later used that ruminal fluid in an in vitro system to digest either a tannin-free substrate or a high tannin substrate. And then asking the question, can ruminal microbes be adapted to a high tannin diet? The answer is somewhat. Okay, if you compare the crosshatch bars, no prior condensed tannin exposure with prior condensed tannin exposure, we increased total VFA production by about 10 millimoles per liter. Okay, but if you compare that improvement with what's normal, the far left dark bar, that's approximately 85 millimoles per liter, we'd have to conclude that we were not successful in adapting ruminal microbes to a high tannin diet. So then we were sort of faced with the necessity of being able to study the intake suppressing effects of Sericea Lespedeza in confinement. And in consulting with nutritionists all around the country, they said it's probably not going to work. Fresh Sericea Lespedeza has much higher condensed tannin concentration than harvested and sun-dried Sericea Lespedeza. Well, we're kind of nuts, so we tried it anyway. We found some prairie hay that was contaminated with Sericea that came out of southeast Kansas. It was about 19% Sericea Lespedeza by weight. We matched that chemically with another Sericea Lespedeza free hay, similar protein concentration, similar ADF concentration. We took 30 cows and we fed them the clean hay, as I'll call it, the uncontaminated hay, for a period of 21 days. And we abruptly switched half of the cows to the contaminated variety of the same. And for about 4 days, there was a small depression in intake by the cows that were given the contaminated hay, which we sort of characterize as a flavor-related aversion. Tannins are astringent and may be similar to what we experience as sour in our own palate. But after the 4th day, when the tannin concentration of the rumen got significantly high, those cows decided to take themselves off feed to the tune where they were eating about 25% as much as their colleagues that were fed the clean hay. So they're telling us they'd rather starve to death than put more condensed tannin in their belly. So we started looking around for tannin mitigators. And way back when the rocks were hot, Fred Provenza at Utah State had actually come to Kansas and done some work with Sericea Lespedeza and polyethylene glycol. And in that work, they fed a pound of polyethylene glycol to yearling stocker cattle, and they were able to achieve slightly greater intakes in supplemented cattle compared with unsupplemented cattle. The problem with the approach is that polyethylene glycol is not generally regarded as safe when you feed it at more than trace amounts in a ruminant diet. AFCO will not let us use it at a much higher level than what is typical as a feed additive rather than a feedstuff. So comparing an incubation of condensed tannin with bovine serum albumin as a test protein, we compared no mitigator with polyethylene glycol as a mitigator and something called corn steep liquor, which is a byproduct of wet corn milling, as a tannin mitigator. And without looking too close at the numbers, what we found is that true protein availability was very high when a moderate dose of corn steep liquor was added to this culture, and that there was essentially zero condensed tannin-bound protein in that diet. You're asking yourself, how can the number be greater than 100%? Well, corn steep liquor in itself it has a moderate protein content. So from there, we decided to do some confinement feeding studies where we evaluated how effective corn steep liquor supplementation would be in increasing intake and increasing total tract digestibility. Call your attention to the yellow bar there. So unsupplemented animals that were fed the same contaminated hay, again, about 19% Sericea Lespedeza, had very poor intakes, had total tract nitrogen digestibility that was less than 0, if you can believe that. And basically were on a plane of nutrition that would cause them to lose a body condition score every 2 weeks. So we didn't really have any scientific basis for choosing our feeding levels, but we opted for basically 1.3 pounds, 2.6 pounds, or 3.9 pounds of supplemental corn steep liquor per animal per day. What we found at that low dose of corn steep liquor that we normalized forage intake, that would be the 0.6 kilogram feeding level. And our second dose, we normalized total tract digestibility. And if I were to put a price tag on the feed at the time we did this research, we corrected the intake problem for less than a penny a day. We corrected the intake and digestibility problem for less than a penny a day. Okay, at the time of this research, corn steep liquor was about $15 a ton picked up at the plant. And we were very enthusiastic about bringing some of that stuff into Kansas and evaluating it on a commercial scale. The next question that we asked ourselves is given the fact that grazers, herbivores, can walk around and pick and choose a diet of their choice, if we gave some confined animals the option of consuming contaminated hay or uncontaminated hay, what choice would they make? And in this work, again, with the same 30 cows. Each cow was confined individually, given 2 bunks of hay, contaminated and uncontaminated, and we just watched what happened. Half of the cows were supplemented with 0.6 kilos of corn steep liquor, about 1.3 pounds. Half of them were not supplemented. And basically what we saw is that there was no difference in selection of the uncontaminated forage between the treatments, but there was a very significant increase in the contaminated forage by the supplemented animals compared with the non-supplemented animals. And their total digestible dry matter intake would have allowed them to achieve sort of a parity in body weight, allowing them to hold their condition. So some years after that, we basically took this to a commercial scale. Eric remembers this work. We found a ranch in Chautauqua County, Kansas that I believe had 20 different 80-acre pastures and was historically grazed by beef cows that have spent most of their lives there. Half of those pastures received supplemental corn steep liquor 3 days a week at a feeding level that was equivalent to about 4 pounds per head per day, and half of the pastures were unsupplemented. And we basically measured their Sericea Lespedeza consumption with fecal microhistology. What we found is that when condensed tannin concentrations were manageable in June, July, and August, there was no difference in consumption between treatments. When condensed tannin concentrations were scorchingly high in August and September, the supplemented animals consumed about 5.5% of their diet in terms of Sericea Lespedeza, which we were later to learn was capable of controlling seed production by that plant and forestalling spread through a reproductive means. So that approach, okay, while it did show some promise, would require producers to invest about $5,000 in a liquid feed handling system. Corn steep liquor is a high moisture product. And as soon as the manufacturers figured out that, hey, it was good for something besides a diet conditioner for a TMR, the price shot way up. So we went back to the drawing board. We knew from the work of others that certain small ruminants have greater tolerance for mild toxins like tannins than large ruminants do. We also knew that, hey, most of our industry here is based on yearling cattle grazing rather than cows. So what if we sequentially grazed yearling cattle during the conventional grazing season, followed by a high stocking rate of sheep for 60 days following that steer grazing enterprise? And basically what you're looking here is results from point transect work where sheep were grazed from about the 1st of August through the 1st of October on pastures that had previously been occupied by steers, while the steer-only pastures were rested for that period of time. And basically across that 9 weeks, and 1 week prior to when the sheep were turned out to the week the sheep left, essentially no Sericea Lespedeza stems in the steer-only pastures were grazed. But at the end of it all, about 90% of the Sericea Lespedeza stems were defoliated substantially by sheep during that short-term grazing interval. We thought, holy cow, we really got something here. Okay, we can have another cash flow enterprise with sheep. We can maybe even bring sheep into Kansas from Texas and points west and develop another custom animal care enterprise similar to what we enjoy with stocker cattle. However, and I should add here, the reason we chose sheep rather than goats is you don't need woven wire fence to keep sheep at home. So there wasn't very enthusiastic buy-in initially after this research came out, but this idea is actually catching on some steam. A 60-pound lamb at certain times of the year is worth $3 a pound. And people are starting to wake up to that possibility. Now, just as evidence that heavy level of defoliation by the sheep was actually associated with some level of biological control, you know, on pastures that didn't have sheep, the average Sericea Lespedeza stem produced 864 seeds per stem. And on the sheep grazed pastures, the average Sericea Lespedeza stem produced, I believe it was 117 seeds. So that's still a lot of seeds, but it is an 8-fold control of that reproductive capacity. And I learned something very valuable during the course of that study from one of my very artistic students, Mr. Jack Lemon. Jack taught me that you can tell a story better with pictures than you can with tables and graphs. So just use an example of two adjacent pastures, one grazed by steers alone, one sequentially grazed by steers and sheep. You see the total amount of seed that 100 Sericea Lespedeza stems produced in each of 3 years. And obviously doesn't look like much of a visual change in the pastures that were only grazed by steers, but to me, it looks like there is a cumulative effect of sheep grazing over time in terms of reducing the amount of seed produced by Sericea Lespedeza. So here's a question. You know, we have a fire culture here in the Flint Hills that's not like anything I've experienced elsewhere. You know, annually, I think an average of 2.6 million acres out of the 4.5 million acre total is burned prescriptively, usually in the spring. That's something that we've done because we believe that that's the cheapest way to manage brush, and that's also a way to squeeze just a little extra performance out of our yearling cattle. When you compare the performance of yearling cattle grazing burned range with cattle grazing non-burned range, there's about a 30-pound weight advantage for the cattle that graze burned pastures over a 90-day grazing season. So this is a picture of a spring fire in the year 2016, and that's me in the center of the screen. I'm a good 100 feet off of that fire line, and I look like I'm praying. I probably should be, but what I'm doing is shielding my face because even that far away, that heat is extremely intense. So the things that go along with, or that we have to live with frequent spring season fire, we know that the humidity is going to be low, the fuel load is going to be high, good weather for safe burning is fairly hard to come by in the month of April, the traditional spring fire season, and that smoke that you see in the upper part of the screen is going to travel. And at that time of the year, the days are warm, the nights are cool, that smoke rises into the upper atmosphere during the day, and when it hits a point of cooling in the upper atmosphere, it's going to sink. I'm sure you've experienced this in and around Columbia. In 2011, we had a very busy burn day on the 11th of April, and something like 1 million acres of tall grass burned that one day. The next day was the Nebraska Cornhuskers spring game in Lincoln. And what happened just about the time the whistle blew to kick the scrimmage off, a big cloud of smoke decided to descend into Husker Stadium, and people lost their minds. That's really the point where I became aware, most of Flint Hills residents became aware that our smoke travels and it creates problems for human health, it creates problems for air quality in downwind municipalities. So, what if we rethink our prescribed fire season and burn at a time after those yearling cattle would normally have left rather than before they show up? And I'm going to play a little video here. Hopefully the quality is solid enough for you to appreciate. So here's my artistic student, Jack, once again standing right in the head fire. It's very subdued. Litter at the surface of the soil is carrying the fire through the green plants at a very slow rate. It's being pushed by a 12 to 15 mile an hour headwind, but the fire is only moving at 2 to 2.5 miles per hour. Very easy to control. We're still producing a lot of smoke, but in August or September, the days are warm, the nights are warm. The smoke gets into the upper atmosphere and stays there. So after 4 years of annual prescribed fire in April, in August, or around the 1st of August or around the 1st of September, okay, we saw a substantial decline in Sericea Lespedeza basal cover. All of our experimental units started out with about 4.5% basal cover in Sericea Lespedeza. We essentially doubled that. So we burned in a spring only sort of a regime. We dropped it by about 1% when we burned around August 1st, and we dropped it by 2.5% when we burned around September 1st. And at that point, it was difficult to visibly detect in the plant canopy. Not only that, we made the surviving individuals physically smaller. The average stem in an early spring treatment, the average stem in an early spring treatment weighed about 4 grams, about half a gram when it was burned in mid-August, and about a quarter of a gram, less than a quarter of a gram actually, when it was burned about late September. And seed production, this was very exciting. In this work, an early spring burn allowed Sericea Lespedeza to produce about 711 seeds per stem. That was well under 50 when we burned in August, and in September, that number's not 0, but it's less than 1. Okay, so we had basically eliminated the reproductive capability of Sericea Lespedeza with a treatment that only costs about 75 cents an acre. And the reduction in seed production is something that we got every single year. This is total seed produced from 100 stems in the spring burn, the August 1 burn, of the September 1 burn in 2014. And this is the last year of the study, 2017, very nearly the same effect. So I like to show this picture to ranchers. Okay, what you're looking at here is a fire guard line. To the far left of the screen is a spring burn treatment. To the far right of the screen, where you see the brown forage there, that's about 48 hours post-burn on a September burn treatment. So I want to say this. A guy in an airplane that's dropping net sulfur on a pasture to kill Sericea Lespedeza is not going to get the juvenile plants. Most of that herbicide is going to get intercepted by the upper reaches of the plant canopy. The adults die, the juveniles survive. Okay, a human being driving around on a four-wheeler with a spray tank is not going to see all the Sericea Lespedeza and be able to temporarily control it with herbicide. A sheep or a goat walking around the range is not going to find all the Sericea Lespedeza plants and defoliate them. But fire does not miss a trick. Okay, every plant in the course of that burn area on the right hand of the screen has been affected by fire. The adult Sericea plants, the juvenile Sericea plants, regardless of their location in the burn treatment, regardless of their occupancy at any particular layer of the plant canopy. So a fair question to ask is, all right, smart guy, you burned it at a non-traditional time. What happened to everything else? Well, we did not change peak forage biomass as measured in mid-July with fire timing. All treatments produced the same level of grazable forage. And regrowth following the fire was very substantial, so we weren't having to deal with or contend with bare soil during the dormant season. Sort of the macro structure of the plant community was unchanged by fire timing. We had similar total grass cover, warm season grasses, cool season grasses, and annual grasses across treatment. But there was a worrisome trend in the forb community. We like our forbs here. They're a very functional part of the plant community, and as you can see, perennial forbs there, second line from the top, were substantially reduced in midsummer or late summer prescribed fires compared with early spring prescribed fires. We were worried until we started digging into that category and finding out what decreased. Basically, we could account for that entire reduction in perennial forbs with 3 plants: Sericea Lespedeza, Baldwin's ironweed, and Western ragweed, all 3 of which or increased your plants and grazed ecosystems. We struggle to control them in all circumstances. And a bonus, and we started looking at some of those functional plants, again, legumes or food plants for native invertebrates and vertebrates. Basically, I'm calling them major wildflowers here. That's my own coinage. But we saw a 50% increase in that aggregated family of plants when we burned in August. We saw more than double of that family of plants when we burned in early September. And sorry, I'm geeking out on you. We actually ran through some diversity calculations to see if we changed anything in a favorable way. Basically, native species richness and forb richness increased with our late summer and midsummer burns, and forb diversity increased as well compared with a conventional early spring prescribed fire. Last question. Okay, if we move our burning season from April to late summer, what's going to happen? This research is actually ongoing, but we did publish the first 3 years of data in Translational Animal Science. It should be out in print sometime next month. This is an aerial view of the KSU stock unit that's photographed by one of Dr. Dale Bloss's cool toys. He bought himself a drone with a camera in 2017. He took this spectacular picture of a fire that we lit that year on August 17th. And we have to know, if we move that fire season, how is that going to change growth performance of our yearling cattle? Well, in short, here's the answer. In this study, okay, which is scheduled to go on for another 4 years, we burn in April, we burn in mid-August, we burn sometime after the 23rd of September. So a true fall fire season. Basically, there's no difference in average daily gain or total body weight gain between spring burning and summer burning. And there's about, there's a small change in average daily gain when we burn during the true fall season. Basically, those cattle are going to finish 20 to 30 pounds behind cattle that graze spring burned or summer burned areas. So I'm getting it all preachy on you. Okay, lessons learned. You know, one of the take-home messages for me through this more than 10-year process is that most of the value of rangelands to society, even though most people don't appreciate it, can't be quantified with animal production or animal-based revenue. Grassland ecosystems are special, and they provide some benefits and quality of life benefits to everybody, regardless of where they live. So if you've got an invasive organism, if you're going to get on top of it, you're going to have to figure out basic biology. And we had to start at a very low level of understanding of just quantifying condensed tannins that brought us to this point of being able to manage the plant successfully. So we also figured out that one size does not fit all. You got a multifaceted control toolbox, if you want to call it that, is going to be necessary to cover an inclusive range of land managers. Obviously, cow-calf producers are not going to want to burn annually. They're not going to, in many cases, be able to co-graze. In many cases, they're not going to be able to supplement with specialty feedstuffs to overcome the condensed tannin content. So we needed something that would fit everybody. So I didn't know really very much about range science or about invasive species biology when I started this process. And I was fortunate to be blessed with some excellent colleagues, Walt Cook in particular in agronomy, and students. And I learned from both categories of colleagues. The other thing that we learned in a long period of time trying to find substantial funding to bring to bear on this problem, we learned that this was a problem that we owned ourselves. Every place in the U.S. has got a tough agricultural problem to solve that's related to invasive species or something else. If you share those with another region, generally speaking, there will be competitive research money available for you to seek to go after and solve that problem. If it's highly regional, or if it's bound within the borders of the state, you're going to own it, and don't expect enthusiastic buy-in from outside funding sources. When we went to federal funding sources initially to control Sericea Lespedeza, the response was, let your cattle eat it. They'll eat it. They eat it down in Alabama. And it's a federally listed forage crop. We can't give you money to kill it. So we had to find synergy locally to fund some of this work. We're well over $2 million deep in this process, and it's come from conservation groups, it's come from wildlife groups, habitat groups, and it's come from private funding sources. We just had to knock on enough doors and persist until somebody answered with a checkbook.
Casey, thank you very much for that that presentation. At this time, I'm gonna open it up for some questions. Matt, do we have any questions in the chat?
A couple, Eric. One is more of a statement about someone who trail rides with horses, that horses find it, the Sericea, that they like it, and the challenge that they ran into is that their horses colic when they consume it. And so they appreciate your presentation and recognize the concern with the Sericea Lespedeza with their horses.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I'm aware of 2 large ranches in Oklahoma that graze a number of BLM horses. And I mean, as a monogastric, horses are not negatively influenced from a fermentative standpoint when they consume Sericea Lespedeza, and they will consume it at a level that makes it hard to detect in the plant canopy, at least visually. But as soon as the horses are removed, I mean, the Sericea just comes roaring back for whatever reason. That grazing pressure is not significant enough to control it long term.
So here's a question. How do you think your research would translate to Sericea Lespedeza control in cool season pastures we have in Missouri? I'm in Northwest Missouri, and this is becoming more of an issue in our brome and tall fescue pastures.
Well, based on our work, I mean, we're in a grassland where, you know, the native cool season component is somewhere between 10 and 20% of the total grass population. We did not change that cool season component when we burned, when Sericea Lespedeza was physiologically vulnerable. I mean, I might be tempted to look at an early August date when some of those cool season grasses are seasonally dormant to apply a fire, but I certainly wouldn't be afraid to try it.
Another question, can you expand on your burn regime? What were the months of your 3 timings of burning? How many years in a row of late summer burning provided your results? And did you see a reduction in native grass densities?
Right, we are in our 8th year of evaluating either summertime or fall fires in comparison with spring fires. And there's been no indication at all that we're diminishing the productivity of our native grasses. None. In fact, every indication we have is that we're improving the number of native species that are present, especially those habitat critical broadleaf plants that are either legumes or that are food plants or native invertebrates. So we're going to keep going for another 4 years. We will have a definitive answer, but I think we're deep enough into the process where we can speak with confidence about the response of the native plant community to summertime prescribed fire.
Just a comment from Dr. Thomas, if anything, it looked to be numerically beneficial for the C3 grasses.
Yeah, and you know, there are native C3s would be things like western wheatgrass and sedges. Yeah, that's far and away the cool season component. And you know, there was a little bit of noise in that data, but there was I think around a 10% difference in basal cover when we compared the April fire regime with the September fire regime.
Dr. Bailey, Dr. Olson, I have no more questions.
Well, it's good to see some of my old colleagues popping up on the screen there. Hello, Amy. Hello, Jean. And I haven't seen you guys in a long time. Amy, I should tell you, my oldest son, who was just a baby when you and I worked together, is now working very close to your hometown in Nebraska.
Well, Casey, we sure appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your expertise in managing Sericea Lespedeza today. I am going to share my screen here right quick, and we're just going to get this this wrapped up with a couple of reminders. So again, for anybody who wasn't able to stay on the whole time, or if you want to share this with others, this video will be posted on the MUIPM YouTube channel within 24 hours. You can go there and you can find this town hall and all the others that we've done over the past 18 months or so. The second thing I want to remind everybody of is that there is going to be a native warm season grass workshop held in Davisville, Missouri on Friday the 25th. That we'll just go ahead and advertise that for our extension colleagues that are putting that on. If you can attend, please do. So again, as always, thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate your time and being here, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today.